Everyone, this is the interview I promised you last week on the episode of the podcast. My good friend, fellow Cedarville grad, Aaron Lynn here is with me. Actually, we're not in the same country, so
I know that's so weird. Shout out to Zoom,
it's
though.
very weird. It is very weird that we're on opposite side of the planets, but that's what technology is for, right? So, Aaron, I've known Aaron for what? I've known you since freshman year. So what is that? Six years? I don't know, something like that. Fellow Ohio State fan, and so on and so on. So, Aaron has a podcast, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about it. So, Aaron, first off, how did you come up with the podcast, and kind of what is your goal behind the podcast?
Yeah, well, thanks for the introduction. I'm super pumped to be here. I'm glad this worked out. I know we've been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
So I've got I run the Fifth and Goal Sports podcast. It's like your podcast on all the normal places. But really, I feel like it really goes back to when I was 5 years old, and I was just obsessed with sports since that time. Like I still remember to this day distinctly and I don't remember a lot from like early childhood, but I remember specifically watching the Ohio State Miami 2002 national championship.
Yeah, we were like kindergarten.
My parents let me stay up. That was, we were like 5 years old, right? So my parents let me stay up. That was a big deal. I remember like we yelled at the end of the game because of course Ohio State wins in double overtime. And I remember
Great game.
I remember waking up my brother who was like 2 years old, and he's like crying in the middle of the night, but everyone's like super thrilled because Ohio State won the national championship. So really, like since then, sports has just been really a huge passion of mine. And I've always wanted to work in sports in some capacity. And I've had opportunities to work, athletic events and facilities jobs, sports statistics jobs. And now I'm kind of trying to essentially build up my own sports media platform, I think is the ultimate goal. But just for now, that's kind of taking the form of podcast. We have a website. We're trying to put stuff on social media, YouTube, all those different things. So it's still kind of work in progress, but it's been a lot of fun so far.
Yeah. And I know I kind of caught on, I think pretty much at the beginning for you. Like I remember like one of the first few times when you had like 6 people watching, and it was like all 6 people you knew from Cedarville, right?
Right.
And again, and I say this because I have my own background in sports broadcasting, you could say, in the sense that I did a sports talk show on Resound Radio at Cedarville for, I don't know, what was it? 3 years or whatever it was. So it is kind of cool how we both get into it. Obviously, mine is more of, hey, I run solo. I think I talk too much to have another co-host. I think it's why Jamie left the show when I was at Cedarville. But we're gonna talk a little bit of football today. We're gonna talk about especially college football, because that's kind of what Aaron and I really chat about a lot, because we're both Ohio State fans. So Aaron, I'm just going to straight up and ask you. I watched the game on Saturday. I'm here in Hungary, so it's 6-hour difference. It's like 6 o'clock at night. And I'm sitting here going, all right, it's going to be a close game. It's going to be a 14-point win. They're going to get it just enough, just like they've been doing. And then I don't know what happened, but it was crazy. So give me your thoughts on the whole Ohio State-Michigan State game.
Yeah, I mean, that was something. That's interesting, because going into this week, I kind of looked at Georgia and I'm like, well, this season's just going to play out to where you just get the honor of playing and losing to Georgia in the national championship. Yeah. After watching that Ohio State-Michigan State game, I no longer think that, because Ohio State, that offense is clicking. There was a couple rough games against Nebraska where, Nebraska and even a couple weeks before that, where Penn State, that was a pretty ugly win where Ohio State struggled in the red zone. The defense looked confused. Even the offensive line, which is one of the best in the country, was like missing assignments. And it was just weird. And within the last 2 weeks, that has completely changed. Ohio State looks like they might be the best team in the country at this point. So I was blown away. Michigan State did basically everything wrong, everything that they needed to avoid.
They did.
Yeah. And part of it too, I don't think Kenneth Walker was healthy. I don't think a lot of people talked about that.
No.
But he had an ankle injury coming into the game. Now, partially, Michigan State was just immediately down 21-0. So there's only so much running they could actually do. So I think that was part of it. They turned the ball over. Basically, it was a combination of Michigan State did everything wrong, but Ohio State, I mean, unbelievable performance. Yeah. Those 3 wide receivers and Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Smith and Jigba, they're literally all going to have 1,000 yards by the end of the season, which is unbelievable. So it's all about this Ohio State offense. They are fully clicking, and if you're a Wolverines fan, I pity you next week.
and fun fact you said on that, the 3 guys will be 1,000-yard receivers. it'll be the first team since Devontae Adams did it at Fresno State, where they had 3 receivers and a running back over 1,000 yards, which is just mind-boggling to me. And what I will say about the Ohio State game, right? Like, I'm watching this game, and you coming into the year, you had C.J. Stroud. The critics of, is C.J. Stroud the guy? He struggles against Minnesota, and then he just plays kind of poorly against Oregon. We find out he's injured, right? McCord, could that be the guy? Buckeye fans that still doubt if Stroud's the guy, you can just shut up now. This is like, this guy goes out, and in the first half, like everyone's talking about Bryce Young or whatever, and him throwing 559. He did that in 4 quarters.
Right.
Stroud did this in 2 in a series, right?
Yep.
And I've told people over and over again this year that if Ohio State just gets a defense that can just keep a team to 20 points or to 15 points, then this team, there's not a team, and I'll be honest with you, I've watched Georgia play. I don't trust Georgia's offense. I've watched them play offensively.
Sure.
They have a great defense. But who do you got on offense? Like, they haven't played a team that's, that's why I'm interested about the Alabama game. Does Alabama go out and beat them? Then you got a whole nother scenario, which we'll talk about here in a bit, about college football playoff. But for me, I just look at Ohio State and say, there's not a defense. I don't believe there's a defense that can stop all 3 receivers, stop Travion Henderson, stop Stroud. Oh, and by the way, we have Master Teague and Mayan Williams behind him. Oh, and Jeremy Ruckert as well. What kind of, and so it's very interesting for me. I think another thing I want to get your take on, what do you think was the mentality change when Combs stepped away? Do you think there was a mentality change in the locker room, or was this more of Ryan Day sending a message saying, like, there is people that can be replaced, and this is, we have to make a change in order to save our season?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's probably a little bit of both, because the defense looked really, really bad, and Oregon just ran all over them. And looking back now, especially considering how Oregon has played since that game against Ohio State. Now, granted, Oregon's just crazy injuries for Oregon, so that's a different story. But looking at what that offense did to us, and on a relatively simple game plan where they ran the same play 3 different times and scored 3 different touchdowns. So that's part of it. It was partly out of necessity because of how crazy the expectations are at Ohio State. But the biggest thing to me is how Combs, and I think you've probably talked about this, is how Combs responded to all of this.
Yeah.
Because it would have been easy for him to kind of blow it up, make it this big dramatic thing that he's no longer calling the defensive plays. Instead, he gives this crazy inspirational speech. I tell you what, if you hear Kerry Combs, you're just ready to run through a wall.
You are.
I got to go to the Ohio State Purdue game, and Kerry Combs was the guy that kind of gave that pep talk at the Skull session, and everyone was crazy pumped after that. And then you obviously saw the result of the game.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit of both, where it probably felt like it was a necessity from Ohio State's standpoint, because let's also keep in mind, Kerry Combs is directly responsible for recruiting the Bosa brothers and Chase Young. Yeah. So the value that he adds, and obviously just for his leadership, his motivational abilities. So it's clear his value to this team, but at the same time, maybe it's best if someone else calls the plays. And I think that's actually worked out pretty well. So it's an interesting situation. And I think the way Combs handled it is, quite frankly, the reason why Ohio State is clearly the first or second best team in the nation at this point. Because that defense looked really good against Michigan State. Let's not take anything away from them.
Yeah, and I think another big thing, and I think you might have talked about this too. I think you have. The defensive line has quietly been one of the better defensive lines in the country. I'm not saying they have the best defensive ends, but what I'll say is, you look from the end to the middle, they're solid, right? Like, they have like over 30, I think it was 37 sacks on the year, 38, something like that, where you look at this defensive line and go, wait a minute. You have defensive tackles leading the team in sacks. Then you have 2 ends that have been injured, so they haven't even been healthy. You get this defensive line together with Tuilamolau behind them, with Sawyer behind them. Oh, by the way, you have Steel Chambers at linebacker. Like, I just love looking at the talent of this Ohio State team and saying, okay, this year is going to be a great year, but imagine what this team's going to be next year with the talent they have coming back and all that. But before we get, obviously into the game this week, my last question about the Michigan State game is, what do you think about Travion Henderson and like his impact in this game? Is he the X factor that can make or break this season? Because we all know we can pass. We all know the defense can get stops at times. Is Travion Henderson that X factor for just not only the upcoming game, but for the future games as well?
Oh, I think so. He's a big reason why the passing game is as successful as it has been. Not because he necessarily goes out and catches a lot of passes, but just because of the weapon that he is. Obviously, over 1,000 yards already. You have to respect his running ability, which then makes it so teams can't sit 8 players back in the backfield and just hang out and try to cover those 3 wide receivers. So he's been fantastic, and also like considering Master Teague has been injured for so long. If Henderson would not have stepped up in the way he would have this year, I think Ohio State probably has a second loss somewhere. I don't know to who.
I agree. Yeah.
So I do think he's the X factor. And especially you're talking this week upcoming against Michigan, where you've got guys like Aiden Hutchinson and a couple of really good defensive players. Ohio State's going to need to be versatile in the offense. They've done a great job, even just under Ryan Day in general. They've been so balanced running and throwing the ball. And also, consider that C.J. Stroud is essentially just unwilling to run the football for whatever reason. Partially probably that injury, right? He was getting all kinds of, hate against him for not really running.
But
I don't think it's his thing.
Throw the ball.
And I'm obviously very good at throwing the ball.
Just throw the ball.
Not a problem there. But that's another reason why Henderson has been just crucial to this team, because he is the sole guy as far as just generating all that offense. Obviously, Williams is just a tank behind him, a bowling ball. I think if you tried to pay me $1 million to try and tackle him, I'd actually have to think about it, because my goodness, that guy is built and he will run you over. But yeah, I do think he's the X factor for sure, especially going into some tough competition here in the next 3-4 weeks.
So I before we get into Michigan, I want you to get this, because I say this every week on my show. I talk about three weaknesses, 3 strengths from each game. What are the strengths you see in this team? I'm not going to just go this game. I'm going to talk about the whole season right now, or maybe the last 5 games. What are the top strengths you see on this team? What are those things that worry you as a fan, as someone who knows the game of football, that scares you a little bit going into this next game against Michigan, and then to the Big Ten championship game possibly, and then whatever bowl game?
Yeah, I think the thing that scares me most is still this defense, and that's because the offense is just so elite.
Yeah.
But you talked about the sack numbers, and that's really interesting because they are like a top 5 team with sacks. They are a top 5 team statistically in quarterback pressures. But if you watch the game, they actually kind of struggle to get pressure on the quarterback with four down linemen, and that's it. When they're only rushing 4, it seems to me at least that a lot of times they actually struggle to get some pressure. I think you saw that a little bit against Purdue. I will say they were a little bit better against Michigan State yesterday. So that gave me some encouragement. Like, man, I think the defense is improving every week, but I still have a little bit of concerns. There's some injury issues in the secondary, a little bit. So when you get a team like and Michigan State in theory would be a better passing team than Michigan, I think. I don't know, but that'd be my biggest concern is that defense still. Because the offense just looks like it's rolling in on another level. Of course, obviously you got to stay healthy if you're the offense. I mean, Henderson has got to stay healthy. But I think that'd be my biggest concern. But I think just the biggest strength is just, man, that offense seems to be clicking. C.J. Stroud is just sensational. And obviously I think a lot of quarterbacks in his situation may look really good with those 3 wide receivers, but C.J. Stroud is just he's impressive to say the least. And you're talking about certainly a freshman who is a legitimate Heisman contender, if not the front runner at this point.
Yeah. Earth, Wind, and Fire, right? Is that what
that's exactly right? That's such a good
great. I love it.
I love good. It. Yeah.
And then I guess someone tweeted and said, "So what's Travion then? Is he like the sledgehammer?"
Right.
Like who is he? So we see this, we see these strengths, we see these weaknesses. Now we have the game, right? Like, as Ohio State fans, Aaron, you growing up in Ohio, myself growing up in Ohio, this is like even if you're a 1-11 team versus 1-11 team, like this is like the biggest thing you look forward to. I remember going out as a kid, right? And the game would be getting ready, be like at 10 o'clock in the morning. Me and my cousins are outside playing tag football in our Ohio State jerseys.
Oh yeah,
not tag football. It was probably more just destroy each other, right? And then you go in and you watch the game. And I remember the 1 versus 2 game, way back when Troy Smith, I believe, Beanie Wells. That game was, to me, the game that made me realize what the rivalry was all about, right? Like, I grew up, my dad told me all about Woody versus Bo and all these different things. And then when you see this, and when you have the atmosphere, like, I've never been to one, but I've had friends that have been to some, and they say the atmosphere of this game is like almost like a European soccer game, which I've been to European soccer games, and I can tell you if it's close to that, that's just it's nuts. But it's such a big game, and so my question to you is, Aaron, what are your thoughts going into this game? Obviously I watched a little bit of the Michigan game, so I got to see a little bit of it, but what are your thoughts of it?
Number one, I will say Michigan handled business well against Maryland, and I was a little bit surprised by that. They had, honestly, one of their better games of the season. So good for Michigan for doing that. They at least seem to be trending in the right direction. The Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is just fantastic. Obviously, we're on the Ohio State side of things. It's funny because my dad, watching a bunch of games with my dad, he's always scared to death against Michigan because he lived through the John Cooper era, which is basically the opposite of what you see now, where John Cooper, it didn't matter how good Ohio State was doing. Michigan would trip them up every year.
Yep.
And I just don't I think Michigan's beat Ohio State twice in my memory.
Yeah,
since
it's 2000,
like the age of 5.
2011, and then 2005. No,
2003, I think.
3. It was right after the championship year, I think.
Yes,
when they lost.
Yeah. So just to, as an Ohio State fan, to only have actually witnessed 2 losses is just crazy. So maybe I'm overconfident. But one thing I think that just sets this rivalry above any other, at least from an Ohio State perspective, is most of the time when you beat the number 7 team in the country, whatever the score, like 49-7 or whatever the score was, most of the time that would be a huge deal because that's like the biggest blowout of a top 10 team almost ever. And instead what you heard was, it's Michigan week. And you heard that at like halftime from this team. And it's not just the fans saying it, it's the team. Like almost all their questions were, at least in the post game, a lot of them were, okay, now it's Michigan week. We're like, pat on the back, great win over Michigan State, blew the doors off of Michigan State. It's Michigan week and it starts now. And that mentality is just amazing. I love that. It gives me goosebumps as a fan. I'm just pumped. I think it's going to be a good game. I think it's actually going to be closer than some people think. Vegas apparently agrees with that. Ohio State opens as a 7-point favorite. I do think Michigan's defense is a little bit better than we saw from Michigan State, to say the least.
Yes, just a little.
So I'm expecting a little bit closer of a game. I think Buckeyes by 10, but it's going to be good.
I think back to the first off, it's hardball. So I struggle to think that Michigan, this is the thing, right? I remember the JT Barrett play, right? Where they, what they call it, he was,
right.
This,
the first
right.
One.
Like he's this far, right?
Yep.
My thought is I just think that I heard you guys interview with Joshua Perry, and I thought it was very interesting. What he said was that Michigan fans are so divided on this Jim Harbaugh topic, where some are like, if he doesn't beat Ohio State this year, get rid of him, he's done, right? But if they stay in it, right, they might have a shot to keep him long term. I'll be honest with you. I've been seeing this rivalry. I've seen the Jim Tressel years, the one Luke Fickell year, and then the Urban Meyer years. I don't remember a Michigan consistency to the point where it feels like they come to the Ohio State game and they get scared or cold feet because they play competitive for 3 quarters and either Ohio State takes it away or just some bad things happen. My gut feeling, and I've said this the last 24 hours, is I feel like this will be a close game because I feel like Ohio State's defense is just going to do something stupid. I hate to say that. The DBs or something like that. But my question for you is this. What do you think is going to be the mentality of Ryan Day? Do you think he goes run the ball for the first possession most of the chance, and then we pick and choose our throwing spots? Or does he say, hey, let's just open the gates and let's just start throwing the ball?
I think it's going to be similar to what you saw against Michigan State. And it was just kind of all systems go, whether that's throwing the ball downfield, running with Henderson. I do think you're going to see a lot of quick passes early just to get Stroud in rhythm, as he has been the last 2 games. Again, it's a good pass rush. That's going to be the battle in the trenches in this game is going to be fascinating because you have guys like Aiden Hutchinson for Michigan going up against what is one of the better Ohio State offensive lines. You're going to have 1 or 2 guys probably drafted in the first round from this offensive line, if not the first 2. So that battle is going to be really, really interesting. But I think Ohio State's going to open it up. They've been willing to open it up early and often against Michigan in years past. So yeah, I'm kind of just expecting to see this offense just kind of tear it open, and we'll see what happens.
And see, I'm the fan that is the annoying Ohio State fan, where I'm like, okay, if it was like the Michigan State game, right, we're up 49-0 at half or whatever, I'd be the Ohio State fan that'd be like, hey Ryan, I know this is not like, the normal, team. Can we just like not close the gap and like not release the gas, and let's just put 70 on the board, and so my thought process is, I think they have to get Travion going. Reason, because I think that's going to keep Michigan honest to the point where they're going to bring up the safeties, and that opens up the Olave over the top, right? Or the Garrett Wilson cross with the Njigba the other way cross. Because we saw this against Michigan once. I don't think they're going to do man-to-man, because I think they learned their lesson.
I would hope so at this point, yeah.
Right? But I do think it's going to be close. What is your score prediction? Like, what do you think it's going to be? I know you said 10, but what do you think the final score will be in this game?
Yeah, I'll give me Ohio State 38, Michigan 28. I do think Michigan's going to score. Honestly, Cade McNamara might be the best quarterback option that Harbaugh has had in his time there.
I would agree with that. With that.
Now, again, Michigan State made him look like an all-world quarterback. Apparently, Michigan, you can look like an all-world quarterback from Michigan State.
I think I could go out there and throw a couple touchdown passes against that.
And even then, I mean, Michigan still lost that game. That's the crazy part. I do think that Harbaugh, and I don't know, I think he's probably, it's probably in his head a little bit. I feel like he struggles to let Cade McNamara actually go out there. It feels like he holds him back a little bit.
Which
think
is a normal Harbaugh move, by the way.
It is, yes.
which it's not anything different.
And I don't think to beat Ohio State you can hold him back.
You can't run a 2-quarterback system to beat Ohio State. You can't.
Yeah.
You have to have one option. I think that's the other thing. So you said 38-28. My prediction, I had this written down last night. I think it's going to be, I said 45-24 Ohio State. I think, like I said, I agree it's going to be at the beginning. I think it could be one of those halftime scores of like 17-14 or one of those like real close games. I think that's when Ryan Day goes in the halftime and says, all right, boys, let's open it up. Because I do believe Michigan is going to try to eat clock. I think they're going to try to eat clock as much as they can. And that's where the Ohio State defensive line has to win the trenches. Just as much the Michigan line does, Ohio State has to. I'm interested to see if Burke is healthy. I know he went down yesterday, which scares me a little bit. He's the one consistency we've had in the secondary. My man, I call him White Man Shaw, Bryce Shaw out back there. I mean, that's my dude. I don't know why, just a white safety for me. I don't know why. It reminds me of my old high school days, right?
There you go.
But yeah, so I think that's gonna be a good game. We saw Cincinnati do some crazy things yesterday.
Look good.
That moves us into what I like to talk about, college football playoff, right?
Yeah.
Our favorite topic as college football fans, because no one can agree on anything. So before we talk about our picks and everything, how do you think they've done so far in this first, week 5 or whatever it is, 4, whatever.
Yeah, sure. One real quick thing before I jump into that. I did have one other thought about Michigan. Did you see the kick return trick play that Michigan used?
Yes.
Why are you doing that when you're up like 38-10 on Maryland? Do you guys that blew my mind. Was like, what are you doing?
You know who you're talking about, right? Like, who's the head coach over there? Like, I have to remind myself anytime Michigan does something stupid, like when they lost to Michigan State, I'm like, Harbaugh always has these meme reactions that I just am like, learned, right? Like, has he learned that the khaki pants and the weird looks just aren't good, man? They're just not good. So
I just thought that killed me.
Or even the what was the other game I saw? Or like the Oregon-Utah game, right? The punt return at the half. Like, first off, why are you punting to them? Just punt it out of bounds. Like, you don't need to. That's a whole nother story, but. I love college football for that reason, because there's so many stupid plays that make no sense. It's like the Lions in NFL, right? I'm sorry. Whoops.
That's okay. I'm fully aware.
Just kidding. So college football playoff. How do you think they've done so far? I have my own opinions that many people disagree with. But go ahead. How they've done so far this year?
It's an interesting question, right? Because the more and more I see from this committee, the more and more I start to believe the conspiracy that these like interweek rankings are just to drive anger and ultimately ratings. If that's the case, And I'm not saying it's impossible that is the case.
Oh,
they
it's the case.
They are succeeding tremendously. It's the funny thing is, and this happens almost every year, where you get these rankings and as you go through the weeks, and fans are just like, what are you doing? There's no consistency. You use this method for these two teams. You use another method or metric for these two teams. Now, ultimately, at the very end, I would argue the committee usually gets the 4 teams right.
Yes.
The process leading up to that is an absolute dumpster fire. Like, up until now, the fact that Michigan State was ranked below Michigan.
Oh, yeah, that was so dumb.
Especially when that initially came out. Michigan State had beat Michigan 10 days ago.
And why is Oregon ahead of Ohio State? That was my next thing. It's like, wait, what is going on here?
There's so many double standards. There is a little bit of SEC bias. The fact that
100%.
Mississippi State has been ranked at different times when they've been ranked. Ultimately, I don't think it's going to matter because I think it's all going to play itself out. And you're going to get 4 teams that are picked correctly. I hope.
Yeah, and I would say this, and maybe you can agree with me on this. One, I'm glad Cincinnati hasn't been ranked yet. I know I'm pushing a lot of people's buttons when I say that.
Okay.
I say this because of this, right? If we're going by who you lost to, right? They didn't lose. Okay. They haven't lost, right? You could also say the thing about University of Texas whatever.
The Roadrunners.
You know, that's what I'm saying. Like, you could say that same thing about them. My thing is okay, they beat Notre Dame, right? But the committee seems to be big on how are you playing at the moment? You know, who are your wins against and who are your losses, or we thought so, right? My biggest gripe is not much about Cincinnati. Like, I still think Cincinnati deserves to be in the top 4 now, especially, right? And I'll get to that in a bit. But I do not believe Alabama should be as high as they have been. I have said this. Agree. I have said this. I think if you're going to do anything, put Cincinnati in. That's fine. Okay, I was fine with that at the first week. But the fact that you have Alabama so high, it goes to show that it doesn't matter if you're not in the SEC, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, I just feel like Alabama lost to a Texas A&M team who, honestly, maybe not a top 15 team in the country. And you look at, okay, Michigan's lost to Michigan State. Michigan State lost to Ohio State, and they lost to Purdue. Purdue has shown they could beat some good teams. You look at Cincinnati, haven't lost, right? That's my other thing is then why was Oklahoma ranked so low? Because they haven't lost, you know, so there's so many, that, like you said, double standards that to me kind of frustrate me as a fan, because then we're starting to get back almost into the BCS talk where it's like you have, you know, if you're from this conference, you're going to get a better advantage than if you're from the Big Ten. I believe the Big Ten's played some of the better football in college football this year. And I don't know. That's just my thought. I agree with you. What are your thoughts on Cincinnati? That's my kind of thoughts. But what has your thoughts been? I know it's been a little – you guys always discuss these things, so I'm always interested.
We do. Yeah. Man, the Cincinnati thing has been fascinating because up until yesterday –
They haven't played well. They have not played well.
It's looked ugly because they rely on their defense. Their defense is better than their offense. A lot of times when you see these Power 5 teams, they're scoring like 50, 60 points on teams and maybe giving up 20 or 30. And it looks better to the eye because you're like, oh my gosh, like maybe it was UCF from a few years ago. Like, oh, UCF scored 60. And Cincinnati, really up until yesterday, had not been doing that.
Yeah.
But even in that process of not looking good, not getting any style points that they kind of need, everything around them has worked perfectly. It was another great day to be a Cincinnati fan because Utah just blitzed Oregon. Oregon is done. The Pac-12 is done in terms of playoff. Yeah. It's going to be the 5th straight year the Pac-12 does not make the playoff, which is just wild to think it's been 5 years. That's Pac-12. You gotta get something working there. So Cincinnati will be ranked either number 4 or number 5. I actually think the committee is going to do them a disservice and rank Michigan ahead of Cincinnati this week. Even though Cincinnati had a better win against a better opponent, Michigan for some unknown reason. And
because it's Michigan.
Yeah, sure. And that's, you know what? You can be upset about it. I understand. At the end of the day, Ohio State and Michigan are still playing. So as long as Cincinnati wins, they're going to be in the top 4 either this week or next week. Now, they probably need a little bit more help with the Big 12. They need a little bit more chaos just to feel good about themselves. And I think there will be at least a discussion if Alabama is a 2-loss team, whether Alabama deserves to be in the playoff for Cincinnati. But I think that's going to play itself out. I think Cincinnati's chances are right now better than they have ever been, and they've had the help they need. And I do expect more Big 12 chaos. Quite frankly, it could look like Oklahoma State beating Oklahoma this week, and then the Big 12 championship, Baylor beating Oklahoma State. You've got a 2-loss champion. All those
Yeah.
teams are 2 losses. The Big 12 also goes away, which is crazy. So
Now, I agree with you on all that. Now, I heard you guys' talk again with Joshua about the college football playoff being expanded, right?
Mhm.
Now, I know you stand at the 6 team, or you said if it needed to be, I mean, you're fine with 4 teams if you needed to
Yes.
extend it to 6 teams. My thought has always been, I've always thought it should be 6 teams, right? Even when they introduced it, I always thought it was going to be 6 teams. That was kind of always like what I thought it might be. The reason why I say it should be 6 teams is because I think you have to give, I think you said this, you need to give the benefit, or like, you need to give I don't know, like the top 2 teams should be the top 2 seeds and they should get a bye, right? Like, you should reward them for that. Now, I can also see where it can be 8 teams, but this is the thing, and I've said this for so many years. You start adding things, they're going to keep wanting to be added. And then it's going to be 8 teams. It's going to be 12 teams. It's going to be 16 teams. You're doing a disservice for these athletes, right? Like, we both know, I worked for a college basketball team. You know that. And I can tell you, the road is tough. Going on the road as a student assistant, someone who didn't even play, your body gets worn out. And these guys cannot be playing, 5 games in December. So
Yep.
I'm interested to see like what your take is on that, and like why you believe, maybe a 4 team is fine, or why you should add to 6 teams.
Yeah. I think it's a really good point you bring up about just wear and tear of travel. And that was something that when we talked to Joshua Perry, he's like, hey, look, as a student athlete, that championship run where Ohio State won the championship in 2014 was brutal in terms of just the schedule and when classes were lined up. He said, and so that was actually, because I asked him that same question because I was just curious. And that was his biggest reason actually for why he doesn't really want a lot of expansion. Number one, we can debate it, and it's an interesting debate. It's going to expand whether we want it to or not, because all of the money is there. So it's going to expand. And probably as soon as it appears 2023, 2024, it's going to expand to 12 teams.
Oh.
Here's why I don't want it to expand. Actually, if it's my preference at all,
yeah.
I'd rather see the 4-team model. There have been far more years where only 2 teams are deserving of getting into the playoff in a championship, where there have been more than 4. I think this year's a perfect example. Last year was a great example as well. Right now, and maybe they'll prove me wrong, it looks like Georgia and Ohio State are clearly the best 2 teams. Quite frankly, we could probably just have a national championship with those 2 teams, avoid a pair of blowouts in the semifinals, which there have been so many blowouts in the semifinals.
So true.
And so here's the other thing too. I'm one of those people. I just love bowl games. I love them.
They're awesome.
I don't want to take any value away from the bowl games either.
The little Caesars Starlight.
Yeah, give it to me, man.
Like, it's awesome.
Yep. So I don't want to take anything away from that. I still love the fact that the Rose Bowl is a big deal, and when it's not it's meaningful, and when it's not a semifinal, you still have this year, you still have the Big Ten champion, or whatever happens with the playoff, a Big Ten and a Pac-12 representative. You've got that history there. You have all of that. I don't want that to be some quarterfinal where number 1 Alabama is playing like number 9 3-loss Wake Forest. Who wants that?
No one does.
No one wants it. And you're going to see more and more. I think people are looking at the top teams. They're like, oh, it's Alabama, it's Oklahoma, it's Ohio State. It's all these teams every year. We want someone new in the playoff. And in my mind, I'm like, well,
that's the point.
You'll get more teams in the playoff, and then you'll get to watch them lose to Alabama by 50. Like, where's the value in that? So to me, and one final reason, and then we can move on to something else if you're ready to. But like, look, Ohio State, Michigan State, there was so much hype in that game, right? Why?
Yeah.
Because it was a playoff game. You have playoff games in the regular season. That was a quarterfinal game. Ohio State won, and it moves on to a chance to get to the semifinal. Michigan State lost that quarterfinal, if you will, and their season's done in terms of playoff contention in all likelihood. So you have those kind of quarterfinal games scattered around the season. So rather than having all of your important games shoved to January, where the NFL is also going through their playoffs, potentially taking away interest from your sport, you have it spread out so where almost every week you have a super, super meaningful game because 1 or 2 losses ends your season. That's why I love college football, because it is the most meaningful regular season. And part of that goes away when you expand the field to 12. Mm-hmm. Like right now, the NFL is going on as we're recording. Whoever wins, great. I'll kind of shrug my shoulders and say it doesn't really matter because there's 17 other games and it doesn't matter a lot. At least one individual game doesn't matter too much. And that's why I just love college football. And I don't want that part of it to go away. And that part will, if you expand it to 12 teams, again, it's going to expand because there's more money in that. And I'm probably going to be grumpy about it, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah. And also you're a Lions fan, so there's not much.
Well,
sorry about that.
Hey, we're only down 6 right now. So
yeah, well, it's because the Browns literally just decided just to quit on their life. So that's our. I mean, I loved. I mean, I could talk about college football playoff all the time because I just tick people off with my thoughts. But I want to go into our picks for college football playoff. So
yeah,
not today, not like as if we're the committee right now, but at the end of this regular season, so after the championships, right? Like after that, who do we see is the top 4 teams, and who are the 2 teams we see out? I'll let you go first. Give me your top 4, and then your top 2 that are not going to make it.
Sure. Number 1 is Georgia. I'm assuming they're going to beat Alabama. Alabama has given me plenty of reasons to think they will lose to Georgia, including yesterday against Arkansas. I've got Ohio State at number 2. I'll say Ohio State at number 2. Possibly Cincinnati at 3.
That'd be a great game. Oh, that'd be a fun game for us Ohioans. Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna make sure I'm not missing any teams. Let me pull up the standings real quick because number 1 Georgia, number 2 Ohio State, number 3 Cincinnati, and let me make sure I'm not missing any teams. Honestly, it could be in this scenario. It could be Notre Dame, which is just gross.
Why?
Which is so gross. But it could be Notre Dame. But
oh god.
Yeah, I'll go Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati. I'd love to see Oklahoma State run the table. That'd be ideal. It actually feels more likely that Notre Dame finds a way to get there, which again, that's disgusting. But there's my top 4.
So I like those. What are your next 2 teams that you think will be like around the edge and then won't make it in?
I think Alabama will be right there, even though especially if it's a close game especially if it's a close loss against Georgia. And that's where it's going to get interesting if Alabama loses their second game, but it's close, because then they're going to be hovering right around that 5-6 area.
Because it's Alabama.
And it's Alabama.
If it's anybody else, no one would care.
Yes. And then,
Saban.
Right.
He's rigged the whole thing.
If the Big 12 does win out, either Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, there'll be a 1-loss champion. They're in the discussion. I'd like to think they're above Notre Dame, who, by the way, Notre Dame, if there was ever a time you needed to be in a conference, it was this year. Because if Notre Dame's a conference champion, they went out, they're in. That's the end of the discussion for that. And they would have
they're too afraid to join the Big Ten. We've known that for years.
I agree. I completely agree. So I think, some combination of the Big 12 champion, Notre Dame, Alabama, depending on how that goes.
Nice. So I had to bring up my phone here. I had Georgia at 1. I think, to be honest, I think they could beat Alabama by 3 touchdowns. I wouldn't be shocked. It could be like a 28-7 game. Alabama, to me, if you're relying on Bryce Young to throw the ball 40 times, 500 yards, it's not going to happen against that team. I'm sorry. Like, they have Jamison Williams, which don't get me started on him. Then I have it 2 Ohio State. I think if Ohio State wins both Michigan and the Big Ten championship game, I mean, like, how do you not put them at 2? And I don't think they would make it to where it's Georgia versus Ohio State. I don't think they would do that. They want to set that up. And then at 3, this is where I get interesting. 3, I have the big let's see, is that right? Yeah. The Big 12 champ, right?
Yep.
I have either Oklahoma State or Oklahoma. Reason why, and this is why I believe this, is because I think they're going to hold Notre Dame hostage in the sense of saying, "Hey, you still haven't chosen a conference, and we're gonna pump somebody up. You have the same kind of resume in the sense."
Yep.
I hate to say this. I also have Notre Dame at 4.
Do you think Cincinnati loses?
This is my thought. This is where I had so much time to think through this, and reason why either Cincinnati loses or the committee is just screwing them, which I wouldn't put past them going 13-0, and they'll be around the break. I do, but this is what I'll say. I could go either way. I could go to Notre Dame at 4 or Cincinnati at 4. But again, I would have to say, if to be my gut, to be honest with you, I think it's just something about Notre Dame. Like, they just seem to always just squeak their little Irish, into them. I don't know. So I think Notre Dame 4, Cincinnati 5, Alabama 6. I think Alabama, they'll stick around because it's Alabama. And but to be honest with you, I will say this: I would not be shocked if Alabama does squeak in. I wouldn't be shocked if we look at the end of the day and it goes Georgia, Ohio State, Cincinnati, Alabama. Would not be shocked. 100% with you.
Yeah, I wouldn't be either. I think that probably there needs to be a 2-loss Big 12 champion for that to happen, which is certainly not out of the question. If it does get down to Notre Dame and Cincinnati for 4 and 5, both grappling for the 4, I would sure hope the committee would have the common sense to say Cincinnati went to Notre Dame and beat them pretty handedly. To me, if it comes down to those two for one spot, and I agree with you, I think there's going to be this long drawn out discussion because the committee is going to use all these stupid arguments when the two teams literally played and Cincinnati beat Notre Dame.
But the thing is, we saw the Michigan State thing, and that's
and that's what scares me. I agree.
That scares me because it's like I want to be honest with you. I want to see Ohio State versus Cincinnati because I'm tired of my Cincinnati friends. Just keep chirping at me saying they're better than Ohio State. I'm like, I'm sorry. You line up against Ohio State, I don't think you're coming out with a win. The
Ohio State-Cincinnati dynamic is so funny because Ohio State fans are like, yes, Cincinnati, go Ohio. And Cincinnati fans want nothing to do with Ohio State. And, like, I understand it. It's just so funny, the dynamic of, like, we're rooting for you if you're on Ohio State's side and Cincinnati is, wants nothing but
So then you have your top 4. So who is your national champion? Who do you think is going to be? I know in our hearts, we really want it to be one team, like in our hearts. But 100% realistically, who do you think is going to walk away as the national champion?
At this moment, I'm still going to say Georgia. It's not nearly as clear-cut as I thought it was because Ohio State in the last 2 weeks has proven a lot to me. I've completely changed my tune. I went from saying it's just Georgia's world, we're just going to have some fun, play some games, and ultimately it's Georgia's championship. Good for them. And look, maybe that still happens, but I think Ohio State's going to be a big challenger to them. Just that offense against that Georgia defense will be a clash for the ages.
It's going to be fun.
Every fan wants to see that.
Does it remind you of the Miami Ohio State game, the national title in 2002?
Because no one was giving Ohio State a chance in that game.
True, yeah.
And Miami had come in with this, 30-plus game win streak. So it's a little different in my mind. But
yeah, I also have Georgia, but I will say this. I want the world to understand that do not be shocked if Ohio State rolls through people and they come up to Georgia and they give Georgia everything they got and they squeak away with a touchdown win or whatever. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Now my other question for you as an Ohio State fan, do you think it's a year early? Do you think this team's a year early and next year would be the golden year? I mean, I know you'll be missing the 2 receivers, but I mean, it's a Ohio State receiving core. I mean, you just reload. So that's my question is, do you think it's a year early and we're really should be looking forward to as well as next year as well?
I don't think it's a year early in the sense that you probably have 5 first-rounders on this Ohio State team, including those 2 wide receivers who will, in all likelihood,
who do you think they are? Who do you think those five guys are?
I'd have to look at the roster. Obviously, Olave Wilson, a couple linemen.
Piet Fier, or I forget his name. Yeah, him. Mumford's on the edge. I don't know if he'll squeak on the first. I had I think Harrison. I had Harrison as like a second-round pick just because I'm like, he's just been so not what we all wanted him to be so far. But I think Ruckert could be up there too, just with his raw talent. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think that, but the reason why I say it's early is because you look at all these freshmen they have this year and the fact that they're getting playing time this year and then they go out next year. I mean, Tula Malau has shown up very well lately. I liked his look. I mean, I think Burke's the next like Lattimore or, Ward, right? So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens next year. So yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about Ohio State football.
Yeah,
I'm glad that you were able to come on. That's kind of cool. The fact that we're across the world from each other.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I appreciate you coming on. Can you go ahead and like let people know where they can find all your stuff at, where they can listen to your podcast, where they can watch you stream as well? I know you stream. I was just watching you, or you stream and all that.
Yeah, well, the podcast that I'm on, I'm joined with a couple of my friends from college as well. Actually, college, yes, but we've known each other since 7th grade. So
they're great guys. They're great.
Yeah,
guys.
So we do a weekly podcast with new episodes coming out every Wednesday. That's the Fifth and Goal podcast. You can really find that wherever podcast can be found. And yeah, like Ben, you talked about, we actually had the opportunity to have Joshua Perry, former Ohio State linebacker, on our show. We've got an interesting guest this week that I'm excited for. So yeah, a little teaser for that. So yeah, find us there. We're on Instagram, Facebook. We're at Fifth Goal Sports on Twitter. You can find our website, fifithandgoalsports.com. We've got a couple other exciting announcements that I can't share quite yet, but I'm excited about. So yeah, I'd love if you check out our stuff. And yeah, I was gonna say, if you like this podcast and you enjoy sports, I think you'd probably like ours as well. So
yeah, it's been a blessing, man. I appreciate you taking time out of your relaxing Sunday. It's only like it's late at night for me, but
it's only like 4 o'clock here.
So yeah, I appreciate you taking your time. That means a lot. So for all of you guys, thank you for listening. Back to the actual Ben that's talking right now. So we'll get back to him and we'll finish up the show. We'll see you.